If you're a 90s kid who tuned into the History Channel for nothing but entertainment purposes, odds are you hated history class in school. You didn't have to be a history buff to enjoy the shows that the channel was churning out. Come on, it's so much more interesting to learn about the Great Wars visually. In fact, that applies to most world history. From the end of the Soviet Union to the French Revolution, we'd be more interested in the days of the past if it was just a TV series. And thankfully, the History Channel knew a thing or two about entertaining its core audience. Yet today, after living through a series of turbulent events that'll shine in history books in the years to come, the History Channel is, for all intents and purposes, dead. And for once, we're okay with bidding it rest in peace. The History Channel found its popularity at the crux of the new age of awareness. The cable network was founded in 1995, a year that was monumental thanks in part to the success of the internet.
The internet is the defining technology of our time, an historic revolution in communications for the human race that is changing the world.
For the first time, our knowledge and information were taking on a visual face in the mainstream. Sure, we were already accustomed to reality-based TV shows, but the rise of the internet had brought a new sense of curiosity to the general public. If you were watching a segment on the Normandy landings, you had the option of searching more about the event on your computer. Plus, the general public was opening up to the revolutionary idea of epistemic access. Midway through the 90s, there was a greater emphasis on making our civilization an age of information by making knowledge readily available. And the History Channel couldn't have made its landing at a more fortunate time.
But as the world enters a new millennium, it appears as if the internet, begun in 1969 as an experimental computer network, is gradually absorbing many of their functions.
Okay, History Channel's network A&E didn't care about the age of awareness and all that jazz. They could see the numbers right in front of them. The network was aware of its soaring popularity with historical-based programming on the main A&E channel. Shows like Biography and Mysteries of the Bible had blown up, and the network knew what worked for them and what didn't. If we put A&E into our earlier laid out context of the age of awareness, we won't be doing it justice. Mainstream privately owned entities as well as the internet were demystifying the word for them. It was like an all-encompassing book that wasn't dense with text, but had cool pictures and even cooler side trivia. The soaring popularity of Biography was a testament to that. Not only had the show put A&E on the map of reality-based TV and incredible journalism, but it had also created a wide space for more shows in the genre. Launching a genre-based History Channel seemed like an intuitive decision for the network. At the time of the channel's inception, it had also acquired an arsenal of documentaries, historical graphics, and video libraries. So A&E already had a heap of history-based content that was ready to roll out. Since an exclusive history-based channel was an experiment in its own right, the channel didn't have to shell out big bucks either. At its very inception, the History Channel didn't have newly produced shows for its audience, but it did its best. And oh boy, was the hype phenomenal. History buffs in particular were overjoyed. The channel was nothing but a nerd awakening for people who enjoyed reading about wars and battles in libraries. Of course, not everyone was tuning into the History Channel for some lighthearted evening entertainment post-work, but the channel had its own core audience that was pretty invested in the content. As long as the network kept appeasing its core yet small audience, the channel soared. But then, in the years to come, A&E would change the creative direction of history to tap into a bigger, more mainstream audience. In the process, the channel would make money and produce some cult hits too. And yet, it would grapple with its branding when it comes to producing and rolling out historical content.
We became human.
Imagine tuning into the History Channel and stumbling across a conjured arsenal of alien conspiracy theories from the deepest pits of the collective unconscious. Not a very on-brand look, right? We'll get more into the channel's decline in a bit, but before that, let's talk about how the channel found its initial success while maintaining a pretty consistent flop era simultaneously. Yep, believe it or not, the History Channel became one of the most loved reality-based networks while making an absolute joke out of itself. You see, the network was operating on an arsenal of video libraries that it had acquired before the channel was even in the works, so it wasn't exactly shocking that it was obsessed with making the best of its limited resources. The shows on the channel were thematically repetitive, and there was one historical event that became the channel's greatest obsession. You see, the History Channel had a tremendous amount of affection for running documentaries that were all based on the bad guys from World War II. Back then, you'd have a hard time tuning into the channel to learn more about the olden days of glory or tragedy without getting blitzkrieged by another Hitler-related documentary. Statistically, there was like a 50% chance that you'd encounter a documentary on 30s and 40s Germany on the channel. Now, this was pretty off-putting for multiple reasons. Even though there was a general curiosity about the maddening and inhumane things that had taken place, the channel was clearly overdoing it. Of course, the channel wasn't celebrating the regime. There was never any such accusations against history, but even its most diehard fans were worried that the excessive representation of the warmongering, racist, sociopathic leader could definitely have unintended impacts. Back in the day, the History Channel was covering the Second World War 12 hours per day. On average, the war took 40 hours of the channel's historical representation per week. Despite its single-focused content streaming, history wasn't doing bad commercially, but we can see how the channel has a bit of history for shooting itself in the foot and, well, making bad decisions by prioritizing somewhat bizarre content for the sake of that slim money-making viewership. Another initial issue with the channel was its pretty narrow idea of world history. It vouched for making the masses more in tune with our history that transcended the modern framing of warfare. Sure, the Second World War has everything to do with our present, from the defining superpowers of the world to why you pay student loans. Everything ties back to this monumental war that ended in 1945. At the same time, the conflict doesn't represent the entire trajectory of modern society. By 1997, the channel did a U-turn and removed some of its war-centric shows from the priority scheduling slots, but it never got over its passion to run war-related TV shows. Despite all these issues, believe it or not, the History Channel was living out its golden age. For what it was worth, it was staying true to its name by mainstreaming history education. In fact, its efforts into making the subject matter interesting and interactive didn't go in vain. At that time, the American public was sourcing its knowledge of historical events from Hollywood movies. It goes without saying, but for the film industry, entertainment comes first and historical integrity second. The History Channel was a breath of fresh air in changing the status quo. As its first groundbreaking strategy, the network hired real-life historians, celebrated or not, to run their programs. Movies and Times in particular regularly welcomed historians of a particular subject matter to debunk the popular historical inconsistencies as shown on the silver screen. Important historical figures and events were viewed in a new light on the channel, and many people indulged in accurate and factual representation of history for the first time. Episodes on Napoleon, the private life of Henry VIII, George Washington, and many more were pretty groundbreaking for their time, and the channel was hellbent on making history interesting for schoolgoers and undergraduate students. This was a risky initiative because the network was essentially shooting its shot for a small fraction of audience. In 1995, other entertainment channels had already saturated the screen time for the youth, so the odds were highly stacked against the History Channel. However, History's executives still chose to stick to the noble decision to do something useful for the youth. One of the most interesting programs on the channel was Year by Year, a compilation of newsreels from a particularly interesting year in the 20th century. Hosted by Karen Stone, the program became an excellent primary source for history buffs and students. Year by Year aimed to rewrite the past by bringing historically marginalized communities under the limelight. The show had a kids version too. In another valiant effort, the channel also aired commercial-less historical documentaries on subjects like the Crusades and the history of German war machines. These hour-long documentaries were free to tape for classroom learning without any copyright infringement. Essentially, the channel wasn't earning anything from history in the classroom, but it brought American education a great incentive to reconfigure its teaching methods to indulge students. At the same time, the History Channel also ran important history lectures from colleges across the USA. What a noble pursuit, right? When TV was increasingly shifting its gears to maximize profits and advertisement revenue, the History Channel was doing something different. When the channel was founded, it had promised to raise awareness about the vitality of the subject and to promote education of the highest caliber, and it stayed true to its word. However, the educational model was not sustainable for the channel, not in the long run at least. The executives were cognizant of losing their appeal amongst the mainstream audiences if they didn't entertain them. When historical documentaries lost their appeal, A&E took a 180 turn to realign its audiences towards a genre of reality TV that had nothing to do with history, or reality if we're being honest. Today, if you tune into the History Channel, or as it's now known, History, you'd see everything on your TV screen except for anything of historic value. Want to see how truck drivers drive their hefty vehicles on icy roads? You're in for an adventure. Want to put a price on a family heirloom that looks like a cheap knockoff bought on Amazon? Consider that done. And want to appease your conspiracy theory obsessed significant other? Well, History will supply you with all the irrefutable proof you'll ever need to believe that aliens built the pyramids. Mind you, you won't learn anything about the historical significance of the most complex wonders of the world, but you'll definitely take a deep dive into conspiracy theories that have little to no scientific backing whatsoever. Gone are the days when the History Channel stayed true to its name. The channel insists on continuing with its branding for profit reasons, but its core audience has moved on, quite clearly. In A&E's defense, the channel would likely have to close its doors if it wasn't for the exciting entertainment that has nothing to do with history. With the rise of entertaining reality TV, the History Channel had to shift its gears to fit into the mainstream model. Apparently, doing something entirely unique and educational wasn't bringing in a consistent viewership. Well, we can't argue with that logic. Call it laziness or one of the pitfalls of late-stage capitalism, but we don't exactly have 2 hours to learn what went down in Crimea in 2014. An objective, non-propaganda video on YouTube infographics would do that in like 8 minutes. The evolution of social media and consequently our sources of information are a valid argument that flies directly in the face of the dead History Channel. But then again, the channel has been accused of trying to hold onto some of its past without doing anything about it. Let me explain what I mean. You see, in recent years, the channel's most notable shows have to be Axemen, Pawn Stars, Ice Road Truckers, and UFO Hunters. It's genuinely laughable that these shows run on a channel that's still committed to imparting a factually grounded education to its viewers. Take Pawn Stars, for example. Sure, it makes for a great show for Saturday binges, but the show has negative historical eligibility. Rick will tell you that your 7th generation family heirloom is basically garbage and everyone will move on with their day. Sometimes you'll leave with $25. Similarly, UFO Hunters look like a grand pyramid scheme to make more ufologists. Yeah, that's how I'm choosing to say that. And despite their best efforts, a bored teenager on Reddit will debunk their carefully crafted alien theory in like 3 seconds. But hey, there are actual sources of education out there, despite History Channel's insistence to tell you otherwise. Alright, no disrespect to trashy television, it is entertaining, lighthearted, and a decent form of escapism. We're already surrounded by so many apocalyptic events that shielding yourself from the horrors of the world seems like a fair decision. It's disheartening to see how many kids died in wars back in the 19th century. But here's the thing, if you take a quick glance at the channel's official website, you'd hardly see anything about the 7th generation family heirloom that's basically trash. The History Channel itself is not committed to teaching undergraduate history, but its online presence is. What's really frustrating is that the network is trying to capitalize on the best of both worlds. While its TV channel is running Ice Road Truckers, its official website is teaching kids important lessons from the Battle of Dunkirk. In doing so, the channel still claims itself to be an authority over imparting historical facts that students need to have a better understanding of our world and why things are as they are. It's pretty hard to argue that the History Channel is the modern benchmark for fixing the flawed historic views of our world. During daytime, it teaches young kids that we have all the reasons and evidence to believe that the Egyptian civilization wasn't equipped enough to build the pyramids. Aliens did their job for them while they take the credit for being insanely talented architects and builders. But if history's website is anything to go by, Egyptians built the pyramids, and if you think otherwise, you're crazy and factually incorrect. At the end of the day, everything is about illusions. A channel named History wouldn't lie to young kids, right? But the problem is that it does, every single day. We can't reasonably expect a 10-year-old kid to do his due diligence on the subject of who actually built the pyramids. He got his information from an institutionalized historical channel that claims aliens are excellent architects and love to play with rocks. Not to mention, the same kid also gets to learn about the Industrial Revolution and assembly lines from the same source, albeit very limited. As tragic as it sounds, the days of the History Channel's factual credibility are over. There's very little to go by, actually. Even if you vouch for TV shows like Modern Marvel, the program's production is limited and not super educational. It doesn't make sense to invest your time into something that yields little information but tends to give you more footage of assembly lines than you possibly would ever want to see. Especially with the rise of alternate forms of learning, from YouTube to podcast, History has little to no standing left in the genre. In this new age of awareness, people not only catch historical bias, but drag you on Twitter for not being careful enough. The strategic shift in the creative direction of the network is pretty drastic. Yet it also lies to you. History Channel will have you believe that history is essentially dead. No one wants to learn about ancient civilizations anymore. Yet at the same time, the popularity of creatively produced YouTube videos and video essays on those same subjects would tell you otherwise. We ought to respect the network for nostalgic reasons, and it'd be criminal to deny that 90s kids didn't learn about the world wars almost exclusively from the channel. But then again, those are the days of the past, and history doesn't want to revive them. Instead, it'll give you another spin-off of Pawn Stars and make you believe that aliens actually put this entire video together. History might not move on, but the world certainly has. But anyways, this has been 10GBill, and thanks for watching. If you like this video, comment down below what you'd like to see me talk about next. Follow me on Twitter at 10GBill to stay up to date on everything I'm working on. Support us on our Patreon if you like this content and want to see more like it. And of course, make sure you subscribe for all your